In this commentary, I'll analyse how my film, The Football Fanatic, about football hooliganism and culture, both uses and challenges genre conventions, while representing key social groups and wider social issues. I'll reference Steve Neal's theory of genre and David Gauntlet's theory of identity to demonstrate how meaning is constructed. My film clearly situates itself within the British hooligan and social realist genre. According to Steve Neal, genre is defined by repetition and difference. Genre must repeat recognisable conventions in order to be identifiable, but also introduce difference to remain engaging. My film deliberately uses repetition to anchor itself within the hooligan genre. For example, I employ a male-dominated friendship group, working-class urban settings such as streets and rundown environments, and handheld cinematography to create gritty and realist aesthetic. The desaturated colour grading and low-key lighting reinforce the bleak tone often associated with British social realism. Additionally, themes of loyalty, rivalry, and masculine pride are central to the narrative, which aligns with conventional hooligan texts. However, I also introduce significant difference. Traditionally, hooligan films glamorise violence by presenting it as exhilarating or heroic. In contrast, my film deliberately avoids violence. While I include moments of confrontation across the stadium between the two sets of fans to maintain genre authenticity, I felt it was more important to focus on the emotions and consequences for the characters. The ending of my opening sequence finds Johnny in a lone situation being found by the other firm. This shows the consequences of what can happen to the football hooligans when they let their guard down, and supports why the togetherness of social groups is so important. In terms of stereotypes, my film both confirms and subverts them. On a surface level, I confirm dominant stereotypes of young working class men as aggressive, emotionally repressed, and driven by hypermasculinity by using teenage to young adult actors. The use of costumes, such as football hooligan brands like Stone Island and Sergio Tacchini, visually reinforces these conventions. However, I intentionally subvert these stereotypes by using moments of silence, close-up shots, and restrained acting to reveal insecurity and vulnerability beneath the bravado. This challenges the simplistic stereotype of hooligans as purely criminal or mindless by showing peer pressure and lack of opportunity as contributing factors. I reposition hooliganism as symptomatic of wider structural issues rather than individual moral failure. Representation of social groups is central to my film's meaning. Gender representation is particularly significant. The film explores toxic masculinity and emotional repression, presenting masculinity as something that must be constantly performed. The absence or marginalisation of female characters, for example, Johnny not listening to his mother when she says she cannot go to the football match, reflects the exclusionary nature of football hooliganism culture. It highlights how male bonding spaces often reinforce rigid gender expectations. Class representation is equally significant. The working class setting is portrayed with realism, avoiding romanticisation. Urban environments and housing estates contextualise the character's social reality. Rather than presenting hooliganism as a product of inherent aggression, I frame it as emerging from structural inequality and restricted opportunity. The firm offers status, recognition, and identity in a context where conventional routes to success may feel inaccessible. In this sense, hooliganism functions as a substitute structure of belonging. This representation challenges simplistic media portrayals that reduce working class masculinity to criminality. Instead, it situates behaviour within broader socio-economic frameworks, encouraging audiences to consider systemic influence rather than individual moral failure. Age is another key representational factor. The characters are young men navigating identity formation. Their involvement in hooliganism reflects a search for belonging and purpose. This directly links to David Gauntlet's theory that identity is constructed rather than fixed. Gauntlet argues that identity is shaped through social interaction and media influence. In my film, collective identity is constructed through sharing clothing, chants, rituals, and opposition to rival groups. The football firm becomes a ready-made identity template. However, I deliberately present this identity as fragile and dependent on performance. The characters adopt aggression because it is expected within the group dynamic. This reinforces the idea that masculinity and group identity are socially produced rather than biologically determined. In conclusion, my film uses established hooligan conventions to anchor audience recognition, but strategically disrupts them to offer a more complex representation of working class masculinity and collective identity. Rather than reinforcing harmful stereotypes, it exposes the social conditions and constructed identities that sustain hooligan culture.